4 days, 9 safety experts, 13 presentations, one simple mission: to make diving safer. This is Dan at DEMA 2020. Safety seminars from the pros who know.
All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody. We've reached the final presentation of DEMA 2020. We've had 12 virtual seminars so far this week. We've had 9 presenters. We hope you've enjoyed all the information that's been delivered this week. It's been wonderful speaking and interacting with all of you. For this last session, we have Dr. Frauke Tillmans with us today. She's going to break down the complex effects of diving on cardiovascular function and look into some of the recent research that we've done on this subject. The session is going to be followed by a brief question and answer period. So if you have questions that come up, it's something you think about during the discussion, please put them in the little chat window on the right and we'll make sure to get those answered for you during the session. But first, before I turn it over to Dr. Tillmans, let me just give you a quick introduction. Dr. Tillmans is our research director here at DAN. She has a degree in human biology and a doctorate in oxidative stress. Dr. Tillmans is an experienced public safety diver, scientific diver, and dive safety officer. She came to DAN after working for a stint with the German Navy. So, Frauke, thank you for being with us here today. I'm sure your presentation will be great. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to you to get started. Thank you.
Steve, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. I'm thrilled that I didn't only get to open DEMA 2020 virtual for Dan, but also to close it up. So bear with me. I hope you will get as much out of this presentation as I do. Thanks for tuning in. And what I'm trying to do now in the next 45 minutes or so is to make you aware of what cardiac health issues might also be an issue for diving, or what cardiac health in diving actually means. And I'm going to talk a bit about research. So let's just get started. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to convince you that cardiac research is one of the most important things that we can work on in diving at the moment. How am I going to do that? I am going to start with the basics so we all know what we're talking about and we're all on the same page. So the normal working heart, just the basics, no rocket science. Then we're going to go into more information on the diving heart, which I still consider kind of basic for a diver. So everything I'm going to talk about there shouldn't be completely new, but maybe some of you might be surprised. Then we're going into something a bit more advanced. And when I say a bit more advanced, this is something that we could easily talk years about, or at least a week with detailed seminars. And I have selected particular diseases and abnormalities that I think will help you understand why this is such an important topic. And I'm trying to make them as easily understandable as possible. Then I have a few action items for you. We're going to address risk factors for cardiac health. And then I'm going to briefly take a moment to talk about the cardiac study we've been doing for the last 8 years and what came out of there. And then what we're doing now, 2020, moving forward, if COVID lets us do what we want to do. I'm also really excited that I can talk a bit about the research funding that Dan provides to scientists that have ideas how to increase diving research worldwide, and some other Dan research projects that you might be able to participate in. So now, why cardiac research? This is really easy. Coronary heart disease is the leading cause of death in Western civilizations. And by Western civilizations, I mean mainly Europe and the US, but all other countries are following our example, our very bad example. So this is something that cannot be discussed away. 1 in 4 scuba diving deaths is somehow related to cardiac causes. That is something that that has been published for years and years, and that doesn't change depending on which publication you look at. This one was published 2008, but there have been numerous cardiac health papers in diving since then. Depending on what you look at, it's 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 scuba diving deaths that are related to cardiac issues. Then we're faced with an aging diving population, and you might all have seen that before or experienced it yourself. When you look around you in the quarry or at the quarry or on the boat. So just 20 years ago, the average diver that died of that had a fatal incident while diving was in his late 40s. We're now in the mid 50s, and we have more and more involvement of cardiac issues in these. And then you will probably read about fatalities and incidents, and you will hear, well, the victim died of drowning. Well, while this is true, that might have been the cause of death, you would want to consider that there is always a trigger that leads to whatever happened, and then there's usually a disabling condition. So looking at data that hasn't been published yet, but that will be available to you in the next annual diving report once it comes out, is if you look here, how many causes of death are attributed to drowning, this is significant. Cardiac, we're only 4 in all of our in all of these cases, and IPE, immersion pulmonary edema, which is a cardiac issue in itself. But still, the drowning will always take the lead. Now, if we look at the disabling injury, so something that the diver might have had before, then unfortunately a lot of those are unknown, but then the first thing that pops out is that all of a sudden heart issues and cardiac issues become the lead problem. And again, immersion pulmonary edema following closely. So with this being said, what do you need to know about the normal functioning heart? Heart physiology is kind of simple, but also very, very complicated, and you will probably understand what I mean by that when I keep talking. The heart in itself really just is a very sophisticated electric pump. So we have a few knots here that send electrical signals, which will cause the heart muscle to pump. And if done correctly, this can be shown as the sinus rhythm. We call the sinus rhythm in an EKG. If done correctly, it should look a bit like this. If we look at why we have this pump, well, the main reason is that we want circulation to happen, so transporting of blood, and the blood will transport oxygen, nutrients, and a number of waste products that can then get to the lungs or the kidneys and get recycled or get rid of. And the first thing that the heart is going to perfuse is the heart itself. So once we have this pumping action, the very first thing that is going to happen when the blood comes out of the heart into the aorta is some of it will go into the left and the right coronary artery to perfuse the heart muscle and to keep the heart muscle pumping. Why would you want to keep it pumping? Because you have a 24/7 contract with your heart, and per beat, this heart will pump about 2.4 ounces of blood, or 70 milliliters for those that speak metric. And if we look at 60 to 80 beats per minute at rest as an average, this leads to a cardiac output per minute of about 5 liters to 1.3 gallons of blood. Over the course of a day, and this is still only at rest, you will get to 1,900 gallons Per year, that is 700,000 gallons, and per lifetime, and this is calculating something like 80 years, if you can still picture this number, 48 million gallons of blood being pumped by your heart, you realize why this is so important. 60 to 80 beats per minute means that it beats exactly that many times per minute. Does it? No, it doesn't. Your heart rate is not constant. So while the textbooks and your understanding will probably be like this, is that it is constant, it is really not. There is a variation in the time interval between the different heartbeats. And this is not increase in heartbeat due to exercise. This is just a physiological response. So in reality, it looks more a bit like this. You have your Apple Watch might tell you you have a heartbeat of 76 or a pulse of 76 beats per minute. But what a sophisticated tracker or a physiological monitoring device will tell you is it varies from one beat to the next, 70 beats per minute, 76, 83, if you extrapolate it. This is important information. Why? Because it is used for monitoring. Heart rate variability is something that will tell you something about your stress level. It will tell a fitness coach something about your performance, about your fitness level in general. It will talk about, it will be influenced by fatigue or recovery, how you've been dealing with stress, and it is a good indicator for physiological age. And we're going to talk about what physiological versus chronological age is a bit later in the talk. What it really does tell you is something about your autonomous nervous system. So the switch between the fight or flight, being ready for everything response, which probably kicked in for me when I started giving this presentation, and the growth and repair or the energy conserving system, which is the one that you will experience during diving, for example, if everything goes smooth. The higher the variability is, the better it is usually. So a higher flexibility in your heart to adjust to overall conditions is usually better. Leaving all this behind now, this was hard and dry conditions. We're now going to go into the hard physiology while diving. And the first thing I want to talk about is how does immersion affect you? Immersion puts you under a pressure gradient. That means that blood from your extremities or from everywhere really will be shifted towards your chest cavities. And this can increase the blood volume that is pumped through your heart of about 700 milliliters that all of a sudden are not in your extremities anymore, but they are now in your chest. And this is additional work for your heart. There's also baroreceptor activation. So your whole body has a ton of receptors that will activate when you enter the water, and this will decrease your sympathetic nervous system, which in turn will lower your heart rate, but it will also increase kidney function. And I'm pretty sure that especially dry suit divers without a P-valve will know what I'm talking about. The next thing you want to consider is cold. So when you are cold, when I am cold, this leads to peripheral vasoconstriction. Again, fancy words. So peripheral, somewhere in the extremities, away from your heart. It leads to a constriction of your blood vessels, and that leads to, again, a blood shift into the chest or into your thorax, which then leads to increased resistance, so a higher blood pressure. That is what cold exposure is going to do to you. Speaking of higher pressure, pressure in itself is something that you want to consider. Yes, we've talked about baroreceptors, but especially the gas that you're breathing, the higher the PO2, the partial pressure of oxygen, the more vasoconstriction you will have, the more increase in blood pressure you will have, and the the lower your heart rate will be, in theory, if you're not adding all the other factors to it, including the exercise and swimming against the current and so forth. Now, possibly because you are exercising or you do breathe different gas mixes or you're on a rebreather or whatever happened, you might have an increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and this will increase your blood flow to the brain. And while increased blood flow to the brain is generally probably a good thing, you need to consider the risk of oxygen toxicity while this is happening if you are diving hyperoxic gases. This is just a side information. Then another component of diving and the heart is stress. So obviously the Western civilization is under a lot of stress anyway. The pandemic hasn't really helped, but now, especially in diving, once you are under stress, picture you have just done a sheer air ascent with your buddy who is absolutely out of breath and is in no condition to swim back to the boat, and you are now towing him to the boat. What has happened is there is a switch from your parasympathetic nervous system to your sympathetic nervous system. So the energy conserving, the everything was fine system switches to fight or flight, ready for everything. And this will, stress in general, but this especially will increase your risk for arrhythmias. And I'm going to talk about arrhythmias in a second as well. And then the last part I would like to focus on is exercise. Why is exercise important? Exercise is important for everything in diving. Fitness is the main key to keeping stress and bad things happening away from you. Factors for this is very individual. It has to do with your own capacity, with what you're happy with what you can do, what your capabilities are, but it also to do with the dive conditions and the tasks you're loading on yourself. Putting all this together, what you really want to keep in mind is when you are diving and when your heart is diving, it is really constantly working on trying to keep this parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system somewhere in a balance. With this in mind, keep it all in your head somewhere, or put it to the side for now. We'll come back to that later. We're going to a few selected diseases and abnormalities that you can find in the heart. And I'm going to apologize now to every cardiologist in the room. I might not be up to your standards with everything I'm talking about today, but I've tried to make it as simple as possible. Ischemia means inadequate blood supply. This can happen through atherosclerosis, which is something that a lot of people have, and it's partially hereditary, but a lot of it is lifestyle. So what you see here is the normal diameter of a blood vessel. If you have things that clot up this blood vessel, then at some point there's going to form a blood clot, and that will reduce the diameter of your blood vessels, and that means whatever comes downstream from there will not be supplied with oxygen anymore. That means inadequate oxygen and blood supply. While this can happen anywhere, it is especially critical in myocardial infarction, in the heart muscle. This is what you know as heart attack. How does a heart attack work? So the normally functioning blood vessel, the coronary arteries, once they clot, this will lead to a oxygen deprivation in the tissues following, and this will lead to the heart not being able to function as it was. So the muscle will not be pumping. You have all heard about myocardial infarction symptoms. So the chest discomfort that patients are feeling when they have a heart attack, it will stay for a few minutes. It can be very uncomfortable, a pressure, a squeezing, a pain. Discomfort in other areas in the upper body are reported. So in the neck, the jaw, the back, the arms, not only the left shortness of breath. You might be breaking out into cold sweat. You might feel nausea or lightheadedness. All of these are signs for a cardiac event or a myocardial infarction. And the response to this is, if you witness it or if you experience it yourself, you want to call 911. Moving on to structural changes, one of those that are of significance are valve disorders. So while usually the valves between the atria and the ventricles of the heart are reducing or are closing completely, which will prevent blood going back into the atrium. If this is malfunctioning, blood can go back into the atrium, and this is, if nothing else, a very ineffective way to pump blood. Another thing would be left ventricular hypertrophy or cardiomegaly, and these are again very fancy words, so let me walk you through it. Left side ventricular, so it's the ventricle here, this chamber of the heart. Hypertrophy really only means a thickening of the wall. So we have this one here would be left ventricular hypertrophy. Altogether, this can also become a cardiomegaly, which means the whole heart is enlarged. And cardiomegaly is not so much a disease in itself; it is something that will tell you that there is an underlying condition in your heart, and you should really start taking care of it. This can be measured with ultrasound, and I'm going to show you how that works a bit later. And then a big part of the things that can go wrong in a heart are arrhythmias. So the normal heartbeat, the normal sinus rhythm, might be interrupted or irregular. That is what arrhythmias mean. There might be extrasystoles, which means on top of the normal sinus rhythm, you might have additional beats. So if you follow this here, you have one heartbeat, another one, and then all of a sudden your heart might send out another electrical signal, and you will have a disturbance in here. Those are usually not critical if they are far in between, but they're certainly something to be aware of. Atrial fibrillation, which would mean that the atria are the knots in the atria or the electrical system in the atrium is firing uncontrolled or not as controlled as they are, or cardiac arrest, and that is probably the most critical. I guess you will agree. So moving from a normal sinus rhythm into uncontrolled electrical activity into very little and no activity, which in essence will mean that there is a lot of electrical activity but no heart function, so no pumping. Why am I showing you all of these? So all of those, ischemia, structural changes, arrhythmias, all of those are ways of the heart to cope with something that has gone wrong. So if you have an ischemic attack, so if your heart doesn't work, all of those are a sign that your heart is not working as effectively as it should. With that, we're moving to why all this happens and what you can do about it. So there are obviously a few risk factors that you cannot do anything about. And those would be your ethnicity. You will not change that. You will not change your gender as much as you try. I will hold off on the age because I do have an idea about that. Previous heart attacks cannot be undone, or previous strokes, and obviously you cannot do much about your family health history. But there are things you can change or that can be influenced, and those, for example, are age to a certain extent. I would like you to appreciate that there is a chronological age, which you will not change. That is the one that's written on your passport. You were born in 1975. That means you are and will be 45 for this year. But your physiological age can change with exercise and with taking good care of your body. High blood pressure is something that one can work on. Bad cholesterol, high bad cholesterol. I'm not going to go into all the hyperlipidemia discussions on low density cholesterol and high density cholesterol. Just keep in mind that there are certain things that are better for you and some that are not so good for you in your diet. Diabetes is something that can be mitigated. And atherosclerosis is also something that can be mitigated by exercise and a healthy lifestyle. And there it is. In all of those, I'm always talking about lifestyle. So let me speak a bit more about that. What can you do to assume a more healthy lifestyle? You can quit smoking. You can reduce or quit alcohol consumption. You can go on a healthier diet. Some people don't know what that is. Ideally, what you really want to cut out is sugars and sodium. That is important. This will also help with the obesity or overweight you might be experiencing then again will help you getting physically more active. And that is really the bad thing here, that most people are just too inactive and are not exercising adequately. Well, what is adequate exercise? That is a question that would come up anyway, so I'm going to take it out here right now. There are different ways to look at exercise, and one would be if you have a laboratory, an exercise laboratory, or a physician that will work with you, or a physiologist that will work with you, and they can determine your VO2 max. That is your maximum oxygen uptake per minute per kilogram in milliliters. This sounds really complicated, and I'm telling you it is. So this is nothing you can do at home. What you can do at home is you can look at your METs, METs, metabolic equivalents. And what is a metabolic equivalent? It's basically if you take this VO2 max that you don't know for yourself, but if you take 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per minute per kilogram, that relates to 1 MET, and that is the energy or the oxygen you need when you're sitting on the couch watching TV, so at rest, not doing anything. The more you move and the more you do and the more activity you show, the higher are these METs. And while it would be really hideous to start measuring oxygen uptake again, you can just go with these type of tables. I'm happy to, this is probably not very, very good to see for you, but I am happy to provide the slides after this talk if you want to. So you will see that this list is distinguishing between light exercise, moderate exercise, and vigorous exercise. And light exercise is anything under 3 METs. Moderate is 3 to 6, and anything over 6 is going to be vigorous exercise. While you should be able to get to something like 11, 12, 13 METs for a short period of time, it is recommended that you meet this moderate exercise, that you can maintain that for 30 to 40 minutes in one go. Another thing that you could look at is your submaximal exercise test, which means you need your maximum heart rate. This is nothing you want to do alone and by yourself. Again, you would want to consult a physician or a fitness coach for this, but you will need your maximum heart rate for that. And that should be 220 minus your age. You can all calculate those for yourself or your spouse or whoever else you want to calculate that for. And what you do with this is you calculate percentages. So if someone, I'm not going to tell you what mine is, but if someone was around 180 maximum heart rate, 220 minus 40, yeah, sounds about right. Light exercise would be anything that is 50% of that maximum heart rate or lower than 50%. So anything under 90 beats per minute. Moderate exercise would be 50 to 70%, and vigorous exercise is 70 to 85%. If this is still too complicated for you, I have some solid advice and action items for you. It is recommended that you engage in moderate intensity aerobic exercise 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours per week. 5 hours is better if you want additional health benefits, but 2.5 will get you at least in a ballpark that will reduce your risk of a lot of cardiac issues. To add a bit more fun, sprinkle in 2 days of muscle strength exercise. But this being said, know and respect your limits. This is very important. You need to start slow. You need to increase intensity gradually. And you want to consult a physician and ideally a fitness coach and nutritionist if you're going from couch to marathon. This is not happening. This is not going to happen in a day. Consulting a physician, fitness coaches, nutritionists, health experts is important because as much as Google will tell you about it, and Wikipedia is a great source for some things, they do not have a multi-year degree in medicine, exercise physiology, nutrition, you name it. Just a quick reminder, if you want to do something for yourself, start with walking. 2.5 hours of walking per day, per week, won't kill you. So maybe start with that and see where it leads you from there. So now let me talk a bit about the study that we've been doing. And this is really just a quick overview, but I'm happy to send you more information if you're interested. What we did is a study on left ventricular hypertrophy, and those who have followed the talk until now know what that is. So left chamber of the heart, wall thickening, and risk of sudden cardiac death, you all know what that is, in older scuba divers. And older scuba divers, please don't kill me. It's probably good that we're not doing this in person today. Older scuba divers with anyone the age over 40. What we found in our population was we found a higher than expected prevalence of arrhythmias in these subjects. And we found those in EKGs that we were taken before and after the dive. We took some of them during the dive, but we're still figuring out ways to deal with all the artifacts that you will have just through the pressure and the water contact. So this is something we're going to keep investigating. What we also found that the divers with more arrhythmias had increased left ventricular mass and wall thickness. So while this isn't a surprise, this is certainly something to keep in mind. And it is also something that we have seen in fatalities before, because we see a lot of fatalities where the subject had either a left ventricular mass increase or cardiomegaly. We could attribute some of that to age and lifestyle, mostly alcohol and nutrition, but a lot of it was really the personal fitness. And you will hear me say this for every study that I ever talk about. This was a very exploratory study, and it was just looking at a big ballpark. What we now want is to focus on very specific topics in here. So further research is needed. What is this further research going to be? We updated the study in 2020. It's now going through ethical review. with some of the changes we've been implementing, and we want to add more stress, and that is why we are working with the public safety diving community. Why are we working with public safety divers now? There's a variety of ages, fitness levels, and shapes, if you follow me. What they also do is they have very demanding dives physically and mentally, and are usually mission driven. So while the normal recreational diver can choose to go on a dive that looks a bit more challenging than he wants, these divers usually cannot. Plus, they're carrying a ton of heavy equipment, dry suits, full face masks, if everything is done right, communication. So this is something that certainly adds stress. And we've opened the study to not only 40 years and older, but all ages. What we're also putting in here now is immersion monitoring devices, which means that we're looking at heart rate, we're looking at heart rate variability, we're looking at EKGs, we're looking at all kinds of physiological parameters that we can measure with readily available devices. For example, smart rings or smart shirts, fitness trackers, dive computers. One has just been released that will measure oximetry. We're very, very much looking forward to implementing those, or to including those in the study. And we might open this up to potentially other groups. Given the pandemic and our current situation, how much we can travel and work, this is probably not going to happen in 2021. Now we have started this. We did our first experiment in just a month ago. And if you or your public safety dive team are interested to participate, you have an upcoming full day training event that mimics ideally what you would usually also be faced with during a call or a mission. And you have about 5 additional hours in that day that we can use to get our measurements done. Then we are happy to come out with a team and work with you. Please send an email to research@dan.org if you're interested, and I will get back to you with the specifics. Now let's take a moment to talk about cardiac health and diving and the research grant that Dan is putting out. So this grant is an homage to Alfred Beauvais, a very, very good colleague that has been working with Dan for a long time, passed away last year. His main subject was cardiology, and we're accepting proposals for anything that is connected to cardiac health and diving, or that can prevent cardiac incidents while diving, or that will shed more light on cardiac problems that arise while diving. The application deadline is April 15th. If you want information, again, email me at research@dan.org. It is, we award $50,000 per year, and this grant is going to be awarded over the next 5 years, which means you could also apply for a multi-year grant, which then would give you $50,000 in the first and $50,000 in the second year, but we are taking anything from 1 to 5 year proposals. For eligibility criteria and the proposal guidelines, please email me. What other projects do we have? We have the COVID study that if you were here at between 1 and 2 p.m. today, you've heard all about. So if you are recovering from COVID-19, if you had the infection, if you were tested positive, or if you had all the symptoms and are not quite sure if you had it and never have been tested, please still consider signing up. It's a 15 to 20 minute survey, and we will follow up with you after that. A caustic cocktail survey, if you ever had one, rebreather divers out there, if you ever had a real caustic cocktail, or if one of your buddies had one, we would like to hear about your experiences and what you did and how bad or how well it went for you. We have a few other projects that focus around injury monitoring. We have the largest incident database, diving incident database worldwide. We do fatality surveillance. This is something that we do actively. So we screen media and try to figure out what is happening and why are fatalities happening. You can read all about that in the annual diving report. And if you have had an incident, a near miss, something that you think the diving community can learn from, please consider emailing that to us or find our diving incident reporting system on the Dan Research website. There are still a few unanswered questions about bubbles, and that is our second main focus area at this point. We have a few collaborations running with the University of North Carolina. Which devices are best used to detect bubbles? There's, especially in the field when you don't have a whole laboratory around you. Then there is inter and intra-subject variability, which means that some divers bubble more and some bubble a bit less, and some don't at all, but this might even change from dive to dive. And as long as we don't know what this is, we need to be very skeptical how much a dive algorithm in your computer can actually tell you. And then stay tuned. Within the next 3 to 4 weeks, you will probably hear and see on social media that we are looking for volunteers to count bubbles in these videos. So you've already seen it running, but I'm going to try to start it again. So you can imagine that if one person starts counting these kind of bubbles that are going through the right heart here, this is going to take that person a long time. But if we have a lot of people that can help us, this will hopefully speed up the process and will help us get more efficient in our work. With this, we're almost at the end. If you haven't taken away anything from my talk today, then please keep these in mind. Stay active. Go to your annual physicals or self-evaluate yourself before dive trips. The RSTC form that has just been updated this year is a very, very good way to see where you stand on your physical fitness. Don't exceed your training and your body's limits, and that is really the most important that I can tell you today. Just as important as get trained, stay up to date, and stay active, and try to give your heart what it deserves to keep up with this 50 million gallon contract that you have with it. Educate yourself and your team members, and can't help it, but please wear a mask and wash your hands. Stay away from people, or 6 feet is still a good distance. And if you want more information on anything that I've talked about today, but you thought, okay, that was a bit superficial, I want more and deeper knowledge on that, there is a health and diving reference series that we have on our website. You can read it online. Here's the link to it. Happy to share it with you. Or you can watch the webinar series that came out of it, which was done by Dan Southern Africa, a very informative webinar series that I highly recommend. This being said, if you have any other questions that I haven't touched on today, if it is medical, email medic@dan.org. If it has to do with research studies, email research@dan.org. If you need any other medical information, we have this information line active Eastern time, 8:30 to 5. Please consider calling. Our medics will be happy to assist you. With that being said, I am thrilled that so many people made it this Friday afternoon or midday or night, whatever time it is in your time zone. I would like to extend a very special thank you to all our Dan members, our business members, our pro members. Please keep up the good work. Please keep up your insurances and memberships. We depend on it. You keep the lights on for us. We couldn't do what we're doing if it wasn't for you. Thank you so much for listening.
Great, Dr. Tillmans. Thank you very much for that presentation. And that concludes the structured portion of the presentation today. We have a few questions that were posted in the chat forum here. And if you have any additional questions, anybody out there still with us, if you got any more, please put them in and we'll try to get these answered in the last 15 minutes or so that we have. So we've got a question that came in from Christine. Her question is very short. It just simply starts: ascending aorta aneurysm. Any thoughts on continued diving?
My initial thought is no, don't continue diving. A more detailed, a more detailed answer, I would refer to our medical team. So please send this along as either an email or call our medical hotline. They deal with these questions every day and are much better equipped to answer this.
Okay, I've got another one here for you. It says, what's the difference between the mammalian reflex and immersion diuresis? I don't know if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, so forgive me for that one.
Okay, so the mammalian reflex is, so it's all somehow intertwined. It's not that one is completely separated from the other one. The mammalian reflex is you put your head or your face in cold water and your heart rate will decrease. Your receptors on your face will start changing a variety of physiological factors, and that will include the activation of increased kidney function, which then will lead to the diuresis. So in the end, part of the immersion diuresis is that you are immersed and you have these baroreceptors, and everything that is in the periphery of your body is pushed towards the center and then also pushed through your renal system. But the other part that contributes to it is the switch from sympathetic to the parasympathetic system. Does that help at all? I hope so.
Okay, and I've got one more here, Frauke. It says, are you still using the Aura ring to track data?
We are trying to. So our endeavors with the Aura ring and the motive ring that we have been using showed that underwater the signal is not the best. What it also is that Aura has the company itself has a very strict limitation on what data it is willing to share, because we do not have access to the full data set. It really didn't make much. We wanted it for heart rate variability, which is only measured at night, or only the information you can see through the app is only shared with you after a night's sleep, which is not what we're doing when we're in the water. So while I'm sure that the information we would like is in there somewhere, we have not been successful in extracting it yet, or to find a way to communicate with the manufacturer to actually get the data that we would like.
Okay, great. We have one more that just came in over a direct message here. The question is, are there any studies on diving after STEM, it looks like? I have done 10 dives since single 2008 event. STEMI, it looks like.
Again, a fantastic question that I would like to directly transfer to the medical team that are the experts in all of this. With any heart condition, any heart surgery, any heart issue that you might have had, the answer is always an individual one. So you need to go to talk to your physician. You should talk to our medics. You need to consider everything and what is going to happen for you is something that really only pertains to you. So if I would now go out and say, yeah, no problem diving with that, then I would have 50 people that go diving, but for them, it might not be the right thing to do. So I'm going to hold off on any of that and say, please contact our medical department for that.
All right, great, Frauke. That's the last question that I have. So we'll give folks another minute or so before we start wrapping up. But just want to say thanks to you for taking your time today. Thanks for a great presentation. Hopefully it was informative for everyone. And just wanted to reiterate what she said a little earlier, is that we thank all of the DAN members, the DAN professionals, the businesses out there that have joined us this week and shown your support through these virtual seminars. You know, it's a very different format than we traditionally have. We love seeing you obviously at the show every year, but unfortunately the circumstances of the COVID and the kind of the world situation is making that a little difficult this year. But, you know, with your support and you being here, you help us make diving safer. So that's about all that I've got. And that's really the end of our week. We've had a fantastic week. We've had hundreds of professionals, recreational divers, businesses join us this week for our presentations. I'd like to say thanks to all of our speakers. We've had 9 very knowledgeable speakers, 4 days, 13 presentations, hopefully brought you all some great information. So if you have any additional information that's specific, you can reach out to us at research@dan.org. You can also call our medical information line at 919-684-2948 during normal business hours. We don't suggest you use that for an emergency, but if you're looking for non-emergency information, that's the place to go. So thank you all again for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you all in person next year. And until then, safe diving, everybody. Thank you.
4 days, 9 safety experts, 13 presentations, one simple mission: to make diving safer. This is Dan at DEMA 2020. Safety seminars from the pros who know.